Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a quick little kind of rundown here as far as kind of our options for the Pacifist run that I'm hoping to do relatively soonish after I wrap up a few other projects. So here's the thing: what I noticed from comments as well as the poll results and whatever else from the from that poll exactly, is that I'm not sure many folks are kind of aware of the ins and outs of what exactly, like how persuasion mechanics work in each of these games, and additionally the kind of little nitty-gritty stuff that well, affects everything. So I wanted to explain some of those little quirks here real quick, to explain, for example, why I didn't include Tactics Ogre Classic in the list, why, for example, I was kind of pushing for One Vision to be the one that won. Surprisingly, it did actually a lot better than I would have expected. But as far as there were some folks that were saying that it strictly has to just be the newest one at all times, there's a lot of little kind of asterisks to each of them. So I wanted to go over those real quick to explain a little bit more of what I meant in the little cliff notes there. And so let's go ahead and actually start off with Tactics Ogre Classic. So this one's a little quirkier than the rest in that your Persuade command actually comes in as a Denim exclusive ability. He's the only one that can do this, and he can basically use this on anyone, but it won't necessarily tell you whether or not it has any chance to succeed whatsoever. In most cases, the odds are pretty high, which would be pretty useful for a run like this, but surprisingly enough, Classic would actually be a situation where there is far less pacifism than the other versions. See, while many units could just be turned into statues and effectively be left alone forever, that kind of would more or less turn into the run, because as far as actually recruiting anybody, there's a hell of a lot of units that simply are just not allowed to be recruited. However, they're not like AI exclusive units, so for example, you can make your own zombies, but you cannot persuade a zombie. If, for example, you were to try and create a let's say use necromancy on a Cyclops, it would not work. You can't make your own Death Giant, nor can you go and recruit one. They're just a different variant that is AI only. But the thing is, it won't necessarily tell you. You have to actually go and manually go through their descriptions, and there's several missing descriptions that specifically do not mention that they cannot be persuaded. So yeah, that's a bit of a thing. So technically, a lot of things can be, like, for example, one of the funny things that they changed in Reborn is that in Classic, you can recruit a skeleton, but you can't recruit a zombie. In Reborn, you can recruit, like, use the people recruit skill on a zombie, but you can't recruit a skeleton until you get a necromancer, which, you know, obviously you could argue one way or another, but I would say does make a bit more sense. There's still some humanity left in the zombie, kinda sorta, at least it's implied from lore and whatnot. Anyway. So that's one aspect of it that we don't know what can be recruited kind of immediately without doing a bit of extra research on every single freaking unit in the game, and B, it's only available on Denim, which would just make it a pain in the neck, just effectively turning it into a solo run eventually of just overpowering Denim and just having him run up and recruit everything, and it would kind of be a pain in the neck. Basically, he probably would end up being a sword master, petrify, and recruit. That's the whole run. That's pretty boring. Now, that being said, I'm open to it down the line, but I'm just saying that one would be a pain in the neck. The thing that would make it a pain in the neck to actually do the actual recruiting part of it is that you don't have control of the unit once they join your side. You only actually gain control of the unit once they end up switching sides. They are officially on your side, they will count towards your kill count, but you cannot control their actions until the fight actually ends. So yeah, that would be a bit of a problem for making sure that, you know, everybody's getting out of there peacefully. Plus, you could make the argument that causing somebody to suffocate as a statue forever, especially considering that actually does kill you in Ogre Battle 64, is just as much of a death sentence as it is, you know, as it is just kind of just killing them outright, if not arguably way worse. Okay, so that's kind of why Classic was left off the list. That being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay, so next up on the list is going to be Tactics Ogre PSP. It will look a little bit nicer than you remember, courtesy of the Tactics Ogre HD mod, but here's in general kind of what we're looking at here. So the thing with Tactics Ogre PSP is not that it wouldn't work for this challenge. It actually would be by far the easiest thing for this challenge, but part of the thing is the fact that it kinda would get pretty dull, I would figure, over the course of the playthrough. So the thing is, obviously every fight is going to have a lot going on there in terms of just kind of taken forever to essentially break down units, kind of more or less pacify them, prevent them from attacking and whatever else, and then eventually create a situation where we can attempt to recruit them. Now, the reason, again, that we're going for recruit is that there is no permanent way to disable somebody. We could use caster units to suppress somebody, and in the case of PSP's case, its main benefit is the fact that it has access to the scroll function. So this is going to be unique of the whole bunch there, but basically you can buy a scroll of any spell and use it on any unit. On paper, very useful, but here's the kind of weird asterisk about it. Despite the fact that everybody can technically use this stuff, this kind of creates a situation where things oftentimes are very swingy in terms of their functions. So, for example, if a unit were to just put on a spear and attack somebody, it would strictly be their equipment versus the other guy's equipment. Not a whole lot of skills putting a whole lot of weight on that. The way that damage works in these games, typically you're seeing a lot of, essentially a lot of the numbers held back by what's typically referred to as overhead damage. So, for example, this one would have an extra 4% that the weapon would add to the equation if its attack managed to penetrate defense. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's the basic version, right? So they get past defense, they get 4% bonus, but they don't just get 4% bonus. Essentially, they also end up getting an additional, I think it's like 15% per rank for strengthen. So now it's 34% bonus that they're getting. On top of that, that number is further getting increased, as in like the actual number getting past defense is going higher and higher every time they use something like anatomy. Every time that they're using something like spears, essentially every rank adds to this equation. The reason that all of these kinds of things were taken out in Reborn is because the snowball is exceptionally quick. Like, oftentimes, especially if you end up running bow builds, you can wind up in a situation where you are just turning into an absolute beast with little to no effort on your side. So, effectively, what this run would more or less look like is that early on, we probably would end up using probably a lot of shield bashes and such. Our quote-unquote safe options primarily would consist of mostly non-standard attacks. So shields cannot crit in this one. Overhead spells cannot crit on this one. Well, actually, direct damage spells can't either. So we would be doing a lot of casting. We probably would be using rune fencers, a lot of HP infusion to keep everybody running, and then essentially have them side grade into caster classes in order to build up their casting stats. And then from there, probably just run Balder equipment for most of the game in order to get that intelligence bonus that this gives. Upgraded Balder armor is perfectly fine into the post-game. So effectively, this would effectively turn into everybody as a rune fencer all the time. But the thing is, this comes with a few question marks. See, when it comes to Tactics Ogre PSP, if you've only played Reborn, it has this weird quirk where you might notice that every class has a level. Individual units do not have a level, but individual units do have stats. So, for example, if we take a look at the party sheet, we'll see that this guy's natural stats are over there on the left. If I can show it over here-ish. So this would be their natural stats, and this would be their derived stats after their class. And the thing is, going up in class level isn't always necessarily a good thing. While every time they go up in level, they are getting kind of quiet bonuses to their personal stats, they are permanently raising the level of that class, and additionally, this could create a situation where if that class passes a threshold that is anywhere beyond, it's as low as 25, as high as I believe like 38, depending on where you are at any given time, they may permanently be locked into a new game plus type situation, which is something that we would end up planning for and end up kind of routing for as time permits. But it leads to these moments where it's difficult for a couple fights, and then like smooth sailing for the next 15 hours, and then suddenly another brick wall, and then just smooth sailing for the rest of it. Basically, PSP, for all of its options, created this situation where you could oftentimes accidentally become really overpowered just by kind of barely getting past the bare minimum to get past whatever you were looking at. Now, don't get me wrong, this is fun for playing around and doing, like, really memey challenge runs and such, but in terms of something like this recruit-only challenge, it functionally would turn into just wait and recruit in every situation. Stuff would very quickly start to pose very little challenge, seeing as even recruiting itself would basically consist of you level up recruit, you level up anatomy, and then from there you basically just kind of sit on your ass and use fortify and just spam recruit until you win. Additionally, we would be able to go and get spell strike as a skill from the wizards on pretty much everybody. Which here, if we just switch them over to wizards real quick. Fast forward real quick to get past that animation. So we go down here, we go over to Spell Strike, and effectively from there, we would just buy a bunch of scrolls to give somebody Bewitch. So we get Bewitch. A Bewitched unit loses loyalty over time, so we basically just let them bewitch, lose all their loyalty, join our side, step off to the side, and do basically nothing. And that's kind of about it. So the whole thing turns into, like, do this kind of slow churn in order to get these units to your side, but we're constantly worried about a crit, so we wouldn't even be able to run counterattack on any of our units, because the fear of a crit potentially ruining the attempt after spending absolutely ages getting everybody to your team would be a bit of a pain. Again, that would be a technical minor consideration, considering we probably would eventually switch everybody over to knights, just kind of running phalanx full time, spell strike, scrolls, phalanx. Basically, that's kind of the end of that at that point. Can't be damaged by anything, only worried about debuffs, eventually work in a bunch of debuff-resistant gear, and that's kind of it. We just slowly wait for turns to come. Again, not against it. This one was the lowest in the poll, probably because I'd assume folks are mostly aware of this. But just so you know, that's kind of what we're looking at there. So this one would be by far the easiest, but also the slowest. I just don't feel like there would have been very much coming from this one, but I want to include it in the list as just a, for your consideration kind of thing. Now let's go ahead and look at what this looks like in One Vision next. Okay, so next up on the list here is going to be Tactics Ogre One Vision. So this is an overhaul mod for the PSP version. Now, okay, the thing is, I've made a lot of videos on this one, but I still feel like a lot of folks that are, massive Reborn fans, again, myself included in that, I really hate that there's any kind of argument between these two, because it's functionally speaking like Solus fans arguing with Armored Core fans. It's like, it's different, it's the same ideas applied in different ways. Why the fuck are you fighting with each other? Anyway, okay, so, quick compare and contrast. Essentially, One Vision will have way more kind of mechanical nitty-gritty stuff to work around with for a run like this. Reborn will typically be smoother overall on a technical level. That's the simplest way to put it. So, and again, even that comes with the implication of like, oh, does that mean the mod is janky? God, no, it isn't janky. It's like, it's little things like, for example, you can steal your loot back in Reborn, which matters in its context. One Vision has a cheat to accomplish that same thing. In the case of Reborn, they have all the voices, and essentially the text was rewritten to work for the voices. In One Vision, they have the old script, but part of the script was adjusted in order to make sense of different scenes. Like, for example, the fact that in none of the official versions does Leonard actually address the people in the room there with him. In One Vision, he'll essentially ask the soldiers for consent before switching sides and that kind of thing. Again, it's these little bits and pieces that are different all over the place, but in One Vision's case, this generally would probably give us the most interesting run of the bunch overall, for this particular reason. So effectively, the thing with One Vision is that it is adding a whole lot of new mechanical functions to the system itself. So, for example, I mentioned this guy as one of the units that I really liked in my personal latest run, wherein effectively he is a recruiter that is entirely purpose-built from the ground up to be a recruiter. So equipment and skills and whatever else are typically a lot more, like, dramatically more impactful than they would be, for example, in the PSP version, and especially more than Classic. Oftentimes I feel like it gets forgotten just how little equipment actually played a part in Classic. Like, outside of very specific, hyper endgame items or something like that. But, like, for example, ruining people's movement with a ranged weapon here, preventing them from acting with a stun while also gaining steadfast to not get knocked backward from a heavy shield here. Heavy armor for a high defensive threshold and higher vitality. Some essentially archery sleeves here to make up for his overall lack of accuracy in a normal situation, as well as some higher luck, which I have no guarantee helps with the recruitment, but I like to think it does. And then the Ring of Alacrity to, again, just help make up for the fact that this guy naturally is just unable to hit a damn thing. But skills-wise, the thing is, you'll notice that in One Vision, we don't have the PSP thing of being able to use, for example, Anatomy and Recruit next to each other on a human character. Now, I say specifically on a human character because this means that others might potentially get more of a chance to shine. So, for example, while this guy is my, general purpose recruiter, he's good at what he does, in terms of getting high recruit odds, I would typically get that on something like a Hoplite over here, who would be able to, for example, combine recruit and anatomy in their particular case in order to essentially kind of double rank those odds. But we would be stuck using a skeleton for that particular purpose. And the skeleton comes with downsides that do not exist in the official versions, for example, having a light weakness, as well as I believe they're actually a decent bit slower. So this isn't just a, it is harder, look at my amazing epic gamer skills or some stupid shit like that. Essentially, the idea here is just that this would be kind of a different consideration to put in there. This one generally has more considerations that are on the nitty-gritty side of things, which for a run like Recruit, or essentially a run like Pacifist, would generally give us more tools to play with. So, for example, using archers for the purpose of, let's say, having silencing or stunning arrows to go and suppress units in order to be able to slowly move forward, because obviously that's going to be a problem in a run like this, where if we're playing PSP, essentially we could just use archers to more or less completely annihilate something before we got there, but then we're fearing crits, killing those units, and suddenly it's not a pacifist run anymore. So we just focus on immortality. In Reborn's case, in order to avoid running into, let's say, those situations where we get crits, we would simply avoid picking up crit cards, and we would go for far more debuffs, and essentially just trying to surround Shield Bash and then recruit something over and over, and then just move those units away from the field. In One Vision's case, there would be a bit more of a dynamic kind of thing in terms of suppressing units until we could get there. There are certain units whose armor in general is just going to be high enough that they become a problem in and of themselves, so maybe those units would have to be shut down. We would go recruit somebody else, maybe send a ninja in to quietly suppress their healers in the background, stuff like that. So you'd have tools like, for example, you send in ninjas with MP sapping claws, or sending in Cyclopes to just kind of beef tank stuff as they usually do, saying something like a zombie rogue in order to try and poison and silence something at the same time. Where actually, was it this guy, or no, it was this guy. I actually unzombified this guy and zombified the other guy. So, for example, we would be looking for non-crit skills. So, for example, we can always get stun and poison on something like this to get somebody within recruitment range. In general, I just feel like One Vision would probably give us the most tools for a run like this, but again, I still will leave it up to the poll here. So, if any opinions decide to change, do let me know. Like, for example, one of those things would be with Hobrim. He comes with a unique class that's more or less a frickin' Jedi, but it effectively allows him to do a long-range melee attack that does not crit. So this could also be used for, again, getting stuff within range. Typically, you'd see more universal usage of stuff like cockatrices to be able to petrify stuff with a bit more of a guarantee and such there. And yeah, one of the things that is around from the PSP version that gets a bit more of an interesting thing here is the fact that you're not actually locked into a particular class for the purpose of recruiting. And that's actually probably the biggest thing that makes a difference here. And part of the biggest difference between what would allow for kind of carrying forward other ideas, right? So, for example, like this knight over here is one that was being used to recruit fairies, because they really did not have many attacks that could get past his armor. So we have a kind of different armor situation in this one, where in general, like heavy armor units are like straight up tanky versus everything but debuffs. So, for example, there's a sort of a soft and hard magic system going on, not in the usual defined state, but like, let's say they're fighting somebody like a warlock, right? And if we look over the spell axis that they have, if, for example, they were to use something like Judgment, it's going to be fairly decently long range. It's going to be somewhat expensive, and potentially very powerful in an area. However, its actual penetration value is fairly low. So while it is a high range, high power move, it effectively would just scratch off armor like nothing. So oftentimes, same thing for something like Sun Spear. However, those aren't the only kinds of only kinds of spells available. So, for example, many units, like let's say your Valkyries and such, will have what are known as burst spells, where they're able to essentially do a sort of armor-penetrating burst. Think something like Combustion from Dark Souls, just kind of in an area nearby them, that they can just kind of fire a small explosion that's more or less a sort of medium damage, almost armor-piercing kind of situation. It can still be resisted because it's still kind of that like soft, basic magic kind of situation, but it does perform a bit better versus light and somewhat armored units. However, then you also have things like Draconics, which actually will use your weapon's damage as their penetration. So, for example, a Warlock is somebody that is essentially given an incentive to try and make use of a lot of specific mechanics. So, like, for example, let's say you're using Aura here, and that Aura would do additional damage versus undead stuff. That's great, but, for example, if you give them just a spellbook and a shield, their actual Draconic magic will be weaker. You give them a weapon with a bit more punch, and suddenly this is going to be able to bypass armor very consistently. If you saw any of the solo run, this was a very regular problem, where even a completely hyper-armored unit would run into those cases where Warlocks would just completely punch past their defenses. That effectively, Draconics are more or less RuneScape magic, and then we've got original Tactics Ogre magic from the other schools, and it's cool to see stuff like that. And we have other tools coming back from Classic here. For example, something like Agony is a spell that was originally in Tactics Ogre Classic, in which the less health you had, the more damage it did. It's actually what ended up pretty much one-shotting one of my max level units in that Griffin-only run you saw a minute ago. But in this case, it's actually rebalanced to be how close you are to the center of your health bar. So this essentially is that same idea, but given a lot more flexibility in terms of the kind of functions that you can do with it. So, for example, maybe you wanted less power, so you healed yourself a little bit. Maybe you let's say your health went down to 40%, and you wanted to be closer to that 50%. In that case, you could use something like a Distill Life on them in order to improve that. Generally, the moment-to-moment stuff has more decisions going on in this version. Technically speaking, all of the pieces are still more separated like they were in PSP, and basically that was one of the things that Reborn did, that it combined more systems into, a more cohesive package. But effectively what One Vision did was it kept those things separated, but it did more stuff with them. And effectively, at that point, we're basically arguing the merits of a constructed Bionicle and a newly unconstructed Lego set. Again, they're different things doing cool things in their own way. So, I'm hoping you can get where I'm coming from in terms of like why it's so frustrating to compare the two, because like, damn it, I love them both. Why does that question always come into my inbox like, which one's better, dude? I only have time for one. Then I don't have time for your question, damn it. But additionally, we also have access to movement items a decent bit earlier. They actually did add a lot of movement items earlier in Reborn as well. But for example, things like you can get greased boots pretty much immediately, getting access to Water Walk a lot sooner, which means that this particular guy was again just used for recruiting beasts, because he could use Water Walk to get around the Rainbow Aqueduct, courtesy of these boots a lot easier. But again, one of the downsides of this, and actually it kind of got turned into an upside, is the fact that the passive things, like when Reborn changed movement items, they just do their thing automatically. This, again, is still using the piecemeal kind of D&D-esque system that PSP did. So, for example, Amphibia, while it is the ability that's on here, has to be activated. So instead of just being Water Walk, now it's Water Walk/Resilient, and the item itself is pretty good. Whereas in the official versions, the item itself had kind of, it had kind of iffy stats, but it was used primarily for the movement effect. In this case, it's made into a better item, but it does have that cost associated of having to use your round one in order to get that set up. But in general, when it comes to the equipment choices, when it comes to the spell availability, as well as kind of general choices overall, we will see more out of something like One Vision. And you may notice that, yes, I am trying to see, with all of this explained, how many votes might potentially change, because I feel like, for the last couple years, obviously I've been explaining all the things the Reborn does well and whatever else. I feel like in many ways it speaks for itself, but there's a lot of folks that have never tried this mod and potentially never will. But again, it is the same story, it is the same world and all of that, and this is more than the usual kind of mod experience. So, with that being said, I don't actually know if YouTube lets you switch votes. I think it does, but I'm curious to see how many votes this might potentially change. Like whether you want to, for example, see talking skeletons trying to pacify the world, whether you want to see things like Terror Knights with diagonal attacking whips, whether you want to see White Knights that get extraordinarily excited about the idea that they can vaporize undead. This is actually probably one of the funniest things about One Vision here is that the White Knights have an ability that allows them to instantly exercise an undead and just gain quicken from it. It's like, oh hell yeah, that zombie's super dead, man! Let's go! It's just funny. And yeah, so that's all well and good, that's all well and fun, and yeah, let me know what y'all think. If it changed your mind, go ahead and switch your vote on the thing, and yeah, let me know. So yeah, and Reborn, I guess, like I've kind of been explaining Reborn this whole time as well. In Reborn's case, it will be fairly straightforward. Essentially, you break stuff down. We would use shield bashes in order to make sure to not get crits. We would essentially be using, trying to avoid picking up crit cards and things like that. Using overheads to get stuff within range. Ideally, it's unclear whether that would necessarily work, but we probably would be primarily just looking to things like shield bashes and just kind of knocking stuff within range. Fear of crits would be pretty much ever present, and we would be functionally locked into knights, rune fencers, and clerics through the entire run. So effectively, pretty much every class would be locked away for that particular type of challenge there, just because they don't have access to recruit. Well, actually, come to think of it, for recruiting lizards, we would still need to use wizards. That's still funny to me. Canopus would be mandatory in order to recruit fairies. Actually, come to think of it, screw it, that's the other thing that we haven't considered. All rogues would be mandatory kills. Because the idea would be to recruit everything on the map. I guess, technically speaking, they could just be left alive and just paralyzed or something. Just take the Batman approach. Because I feel like just kind of talking everybody to your side is the more pacifist option, you know? But yeah, rogues, there's nothing that could be done to help rogues, since they're no longer recruitable. So I guess that would be a thing as well. Huh. Also, wait a minute. Lizardmen got... No, wait, that's Beast Tamer. Hold on. I clicked on the wrong thing. I was going to say, I don't remember that the Lizardman got access to Rogue in One Vision, but no, it's these guys that have access to it. Are there any stat differences? No. Anyway, so, that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one. Change your vote if you will, don't if you don't, and then we'll go with whatever's picked. Alright, see y'all later. Bye.